All right, Alexander, let's talk about the energy crisis in Europe, in the UK, in the United States. I was actually reading an article or an interview from a conference, and I'm trying to pull it up right now of oil CEOs who made the claim that Europe is in a terrible position with regards to oil and gas. But the real difficulty, the real problems for Europe are going to start in 2023, not in 2022, just because they managed to get in the first half of the year Russian gas, get access to Russian gas. When they run through their storage, they're not going to have the availability to stock up again on Russian gas. And these energy CEOs said that's when the real problem for Europe begins. On the flip side, I was reading a study from S&P Global, which said that the U.S. is cranking up their LNG production and they're building terminals. And they hope that in the next few years, the U.S. will have enough infrastructure to actually just barely provide Europe with the gas that they need. It'll come at a very expensive price tag. I mean, it's going to be very costly. It's going to be very time consuming. It's not going to be as steady and dependable as the Russian pipeline gas, but at least Europe will have access to all of this U.S. LNG. And of course, the U.S. LNG market, the U.S. gas market is going to see record profits. I read today that U.S. oil had record profits, record revenues as well. I just see a lot of different winners, but one big loser in all of this, and that's the European Union. I mean, one massive, huge loser is the European Union. And I'll even say European Union business and the end consumer. These are the big losers in this entire crisis.
Absolutely, you got it 100% right, and both points are completely correct. Now, over time, yes, you can crank up LNG in the United States. It'll, as you said, be very difficult to do. It's expensive. You need to build terminals. You need to build facilities. You need to build ships to ship this stuff. It can't happen in a year or 2 years. Probably 10 years is the realistic time frame if you're going to replace all that Russian pipeline gas. And remember, the Europeans are going to be competing against the Far East. China's increasingly becoming a major importer of LNG. So, I mean, that's going to increase as well. And they're buying it, by the way, from all sorts of sources. But the LNG market is a global one. So, but eventually, no doubt, there will be enough LNG produced in the United States to just about help the Europeans out. It will take longer than I think that time frame that you were reading about says. But it doesn't sort their immediate problems. Now, they might just have enough gas, some people think, in their reserves to get them through this year. Now, this is, by the way, controversial. Some people say that this is a misunderstanding of how these reserves work, that the reserves are not there to provide Europe with all the gas it needs through the winter. It was basically, the reserves were created by Gazprom to keep smooth gas flows, not to supply Europe with gas throughout the whole winter. And of course, it apparently anyway will depend a great deal on how cold the winter turns out to be. And the weather in Britain at the moment is very cold and getting colder. So, we will see. They might be able, however, let's assume that they do, eke it out through this winter. Where are they going to get the gas afterwards? They can't get it from Russia. That's completely ruled out. They've ruled it out. Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, out of commission. Probably the pipelines in Ukraine are going to be out of commission as well. So they can't get it from Russia. What do they do in 2023? Qatar has told them we can't supply you with more LNG. Algeria is looking increasingly sceptical about increasing its natural gas supplies. There just isn't a replacement for Russian gas. Now, Europe is paying the price of Robert Habeck, because Robert Habeck was telling everybody at the start of this year that he was building up these reserves, and that at the end of 2022, Germany and Europe would not need more Russian gas. He never made it clear to people that what he was actually doing was increasing imports of Russian gas, and that he was filling up the gas, the reserves with Russian gas, but that he had no plan going forward. Now, the Russians figure that out. Over the course of the summer, Russian gas flows started to fall. Partly, it must be said, because of actions that Habeck and the Europeans did. But the fact is, he has no long-term solution for Europe's energy problems. He's got nobody has. And so Europe could very easily be facing a massive energy crisis over the course of 2023 and beyond. And long-term, it's now, as we've discussed so many times on the Duran, going to become a high energy cost business environment, which is in an accelerating drop towards deindustrialization.
I mean, I've read reports that in the UK, some households are spending up to 50% of their income just on electricity and energy. How is that possibly sustainable for a society? It's not.
It is not.
And some of the plans being floated around in Europe, actually, I think a lot of them have come to effect, at least in the short term, is to subsidize. I think Germany is going to be spending 200 billion on just subsidizing these costs for consumers and small to medium sized businesses, but that's not sustainable either in the medium to long run. So none of this is possible in a year or two down the line. Maybe they can eke it out this winter. Maybe, like you said, maybe they can get through this winter, but after that, they don't have any options. There's no money printing. There's no subsidies. There's no other sources for gas or oil. And on top of this, the G7 announced a couple of days ago that they're going to put a cap on oil.
Yeah,
that's not going to make things better. It's going to make things worse.
Absolutely. No, you're right on every count. I mean, the thing to understand is, if just talking quickly about Britain, of course, the British government did exactly what Germany's doing. They bailed out British consumers by subsidising household bills. It was the single thing that blew up Liz Truss's government because it is financially impossible. So in April, those subsidies end. In April, there's no more subsidies provided to British households. Now, you're quite right. Some of them are paying up to 50% on their household energy costs. We have this concept in Britain of energy poverty. So people are living without, central heating, without electricity. It's actually spreading in Britain with all the consequences through the winter. And of course, come April, there will be many, many, many millions more in that position, because energy prices are just going to zoom in April, and the same sooner or later is going to happen in Germany as well, because 200 billion euros may sound like an awful lot of money, but it isn't really enough to sustain this, as you said, for very long. And eventually the Germans will come up with under the same constraints that the Liz Truss government came under in Britain as well.
And the price cap? The G7 plus cap. Australia price cap?
Well, the price cap idea, I think, is already looking like it's holed under the waterline. India, China, Turkey, other big importers have said that they're not going to pay any attention to it. The Western powers, the G7, have already said that it won't affect secondary sales of Russian oil. So, this is going to be a smuggler's charter. People will buy what they call, oil from China. Then they'll say, well, it's Russian oil, but we will sell it at whatever price we want. Oil price caps are going to achieve one thing. They're going to disrupt the energy market. They're going to create shortages. They're going to spike costs. Well, they're not going to affect the Russians, who'll be able to go on selling to India, China, Turkey, and all the others in exactly the same way as previously. All it's going to do is going to create a massive corruption and inefficiency in the world oil markets, which is going to push up prices even further and could conceivably lead to shortages as well. And of course, the other thing it's done is it's infuriated the other oil producers, the Saudis and all the others, who do not like to see the Western powers dictating any part of the oil price.
Finally, in Europe, what kind of businesses, what kind of industry are you going to be able to have in Europe going forward? Or
I
none?
don't know.
No
I don't know.
industry.
I'm traveling at the moment. This is why, you can see the background is different. I'm traveling at the moment through the English regions, and I was in a town, a well-known town here in Britain, and, as I always do, I went to the local pub, the big pub here. It was closed, permanently closed, because they can't afford the energy costs. And that's not even industry. They're not talking about industrial, activities. So I don't know what kind of businesses are going to survive. People in the financial services industries, no doubt, they probably are going to be able to withstand it to some extent. Some people in services, but ultimately everybody uses energy. Even the most, shall we say, energy light business uses some energy. A few businesses that work entirely virtually. Probably we'll be seeing more of that. People going over entirely to internet work. But, education institutions, for example, use energy. How do they get by? I just don't know. All are affected, and government will be affected as well, because the more businesses close, the fewer people pay taxes.
Yeah. Can the United States afford to flip the bill for the entire European Union? Because that's where we're heading.
No, it can't. Of course it can't. And bear in mind that the United States isn't in such good shape itself. It's got very high inflation. It's already heavily in debt. There are mounting problems in the American economy. As you rightly said, American energy business will do well out of this in the short to medium term, but ultimately it's not sustainable either.
All right, we will leave it there at the Duran.locals.com, everybody. We are also on Rockfin. You will find a link to that down below. And the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.